Welcome to the Thinking Abyss podcast, a philosophical journey through consciousness, reality, and the phenomena that challenge our understanding of existence. From ancient wisdom to cutting-edge theories, we explore where philosophy meets science and curiosity leads to the edge of the unknown.
Okay, let's unpack this. Think about a really difficult choice you've had to make. I mean, something painful.
Yeah.
Maybe leaving a job you weren't sure about, or deciding whether to forgive someone, or maybe finally kicking a bad habit.
Mm-hmm.
In that moment, right, you feel this immense weight, this knowing that it's you're the one making the call. It feels absolutely undeniable.
It does. That feeling, that immediate, powerful sense of being the one in charge, making the decision.
Yeah.
That's what makes this whole topic such a paradox, doesn't it?
Yeah, it feels absurd to even question it.
Exactly. But, the sources we're looking at today, they really push back hard on this. They raise this unsettling question. What if that feeling, that core sense of agency, is just an illusion?
An illusion, like a really convincing one.
Incredibly convincing. Maybe one of the most elaborate, most persistent illusions our minds create.
Yeah.
What if we're essentially complex biological machines, running these predetermined programs, but, and here's the twist, we feel completely free while doing it?
Wow. Okay, so if free will isn't real, if it's illusory, that changes everything, doesn't it? The implications are just massive.
Oh, absolutely seismic. You're right. Because think about it, the whole idea of choice, it underpins almost, everything in how we structure our lives and societies.
Moral responsibility, for starters.
Precisely. If there's no actual choice, how can we hold anyone accountable? Punishing someone, praising someone.
Yeah.
It all seems to rest on the idea that they could have done otherwise.
Right. Justice systems, personal relationships, even things like love and dignity.
It cuts right to the core of all of that. So our mission today is really to dive deep into this. We're looking at challenges from neuroscience, from psychology, physics, even evolutionary theory. We want to try and understand, what are the mechanisms behind this feeling, this potential illusion? And what does it actually mean to live day to day in a world where choice feels incredibly real, but maybe it's all laid out already?
For the longest time, this was purely philosophical, right? Debates about fate and free will.
Centuries of it, yeah.
But the modern challenge, the real scientific assault on conscious choice, that didn't start in philosophy departments, did it? It started in the lab, with people actually looking inside the brain.
Absolutely. It moved from the armchair to the lab bench. And the pivotal moment, the experiment that really threw a wrench in the works, was Benjamin Libet's work back in the 1980s.
Ah, the Libet experiment. I've heard of this. What exactly did he do? It was something quite simple, wasn't it?
Deceptively simple. He asked people to do a basic voluntary action, like flick their wrist or flex a finger, just whenever they felt the urge to do it.
Okay.
The crucial part, though, was that they also had to watch this special, fast-moving clock and pinpoint the exact moment they first became consciously aware of their intention, their decision to make that move.
And while they're doing this, he's got electrodes on their scalp measuring brain activity using EEG.
That's right. And that's where he found it, the now famous readiness potential. It's this specific pattern, a buildup of electrical activity in the motor cortex that happens before you actually move.
Okay, so the brain prepares to move. That makes sense. But what was the shocking part?
The timing. Libet found that this readiness potential started building up, on average, several hundred milliseconds before the person reported being consciously aware of deciding to move.
Wait, several hundred milliseconds?
Yeah, like 300 to 500 milliseconds, sometimes more.
So the brain activity, the preparation for the action, begins significantly before the conscious feeling of, okay, I'm going to move now.
That's exactly what his results showed. The implication was stunning.
Yeah.
Your brain seems to initiate the process of making a voluntary movement before your conscious mind is even aware of the intention to do so.
Okay, hold on. That feels wrong. I mean, a few hundred milliseconds, that's less than half a second, and we're talking about just flexing a finger. Critics always jump on this, right? The triviality objection.
They do, absolutely.
Does deciding when to flex your wrist really tell us anything about deciding to, say, change careers or end a relationship? Those feel like deeply conscious processes.
That's a very fair criticism, and it's one Libet himself acknowledged. The task was simple, but crucially, the research didn't just stop with Libet. Things got ramped up later on.
How so? What came next?
Well, fast forward to the 2000s, and researchers started using fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging. This lets you look deeper into the brain, see activity in different regions with better spatial resolution.
Okay, so more advanced tech. Did they find the same thing?
They found something even more dramatic. In studies where people had to make a simple choice, like pressing a button with their left or right hand, researchers using sophisticated algorithms to analyze the fMRI data could predict which hand the person would choose.
Predict before the person knew.
Yeah, get this, up to 10 full seconds before the person reported consciously making the decision.
10 seconds. That's not milliseconds anymore. That's an eternity in brain time.
It's huge, 10 seconds. It strongly suggests that the conscious feeling of, okay, I choose this one, is really just the final surfacing into awareness of a decision process that was initiated unconsciously, maybe involving different brain networks much, much earlier.
So my conscious experience isn't the CEO making the big call. It's more like the press secretary walking into the briefing room way after the decision was made in the back rooms, and then announcing it confidently as if it just happened.
That is a brilliant analogy, yes. Consciousness seems to function more like a narrator, constructing a coherent story after the fact. I decided this because it creates the narrative of intentional choice, rather than being the actual author of it.
Wow. Okay, so the neuroscience points to unconscious processes driving the show, but then this inevitably pulls physics into it, right? Because brain activity is, at bottom, physical stuff. Particles, electricity.
Exactly. You can't talk about brain processes without eventually hitting the fundamental laws that govern those processes. And this brings in the challenge from physics, which has its own history.
You mean like classical determinism?
Right. Think of Laplace's demon. This was a thought experiment from the early 19th century. Pierre-Simon Laplace imagined this hypothetical superintelligence.
The demon.
Yeah, the demon. If this intelligence knew the precise position and momentum of every single particle in the universe at one specific moment,
It could calculate everything, the entire future.
perfectly, and the entire past.
Yeah.
In that view, the universe is just this incredibly intricate clockwork mechanism. Everything unfolds according to fixed laws.
So if the universe is like a giant cosmic spreadsheet and the demon knows all the formulas and starting values,
That every thought you have, every choice you make, was already baked in from the beginning. It's just the necessary consequence of the previous state of the universe stretching all the way back. In that clockwork view, free will is simply impossible. There's no room for it.
okay, but physics didn't stop there. We got quantum mechanics, right? Which says things at the smallest scales aren't perfectly predictable. There's inherent randomness, uncertainty. Doesn't that quantum fuzziness save free will? Give it some wiggle room.
Ah, that's the common hope, but most physicists and philosophers argue it doesn't quite work. Yes, quantum mechanics introduces genuine randomness. Things happen at the subatomic level that are, as far as we know, truly unpredictable.
So not determined.
Not determined in the classical sense, no. But here's the crucial point our sources emphasize. Randomness isn't the same thing as agency.
What do you mean?
Well, imagine your decision to have coffee or tea this morning was literally determined by whether a specific electron in your brain randomly spun up or down. You still didn't choose it, did you?
No. It would just be a random event happening in me.
Exactly. The outcome was unpredictable, maybe, but it wasn't authored by you, by your conscious deliberation or values. It was just quantum noise. So quantum randomness doesn't seem to give us the kind of meaningful control we associate with free will.
So we escape determinism only to land in randomness. Neither feels like me choosing.
Precisely. If your action is determined by prior causes, it wasn't freely chosen by you in that moment. If it's determined by random quantum events, it wasn't purposely chosen by you either. It just happened.
What about chaos theory? That sometimes comes up. The idea that the brain is chaotic, unpredictable.
Yeah, chaos theory adds another layer. It suggests systems like the brain, while potentially deterministic at a fundamental level, are incredibly sensitive to initial conditions. The tiniest immeasurable fluctuation, a stray neural firing, a minute change in blood flow could theoretically cascade and lead to vastly different outcomes.
Like the butterfly effect.
Exactly. So in practice, predicting the long-term behavior of a chaotic system like the brain might be impossible, even if it's technically deterministic. This practical unpredictability creates a space that feels a lot like freedom.
So it feels free because we can't possibly predict it, even if the underlying rules are fixed.
That's the idea. The emergent behavior is so complex, so sensitive, that it seems open and undetermined from our perspective, even if the micro-level physics is playing out according to set rules. We experience that complexity and unpredictability as choice.
Okay, so the neuroscience suggests our brain decides before we do, and physics suggests the universe might be deterministic or just random, neither giving us true agency. Let's shift gears a bit to psychology. Psychology looks less at the internal mechanics and more at how easily our feeling of choice can be swayed by outside stuff, right? Things we're not even aware of.
Absolutely. This is where the plot thickens, I think, because psychology demonstrates just how malleable our sense of autonomous choice really is. It shows we can be nudged, primed, and influenced in ways we have absolutely no conscious access to.
It's like exploiting that chaotic sensitivity we just talked about, tiny inputs having big effects.
That's a great way to put it. Psychology catalogs all the ways external cues can hijack our decisions without us realizing it.
Can you give some concrete examples? I know there are some really famous, almost weird ones.
Oh yeah, the priming studies are classics. One of the most cited is the elderly word study. Researchers had participants work on tasks, like unscrambling sentences, that subtly included words associated with old age, things like wrinkled, Florida, bingo, gray.
Okay, just embedded in the task, not obvious.
Exactly. Then, afterwards, they secretly timed how long it took these participants to walk down the hallway when leaving the lab. And guess what?
They walked slower.
Significantly slower than a control group who hadn't been exposed to the elderly words. And the kicker is, when asked, none of them had any awareness that the words had influenced them. They just felt like walking at that pace, their chosen pace.
That's wild. The environment is literally changing our physical behavior without consent.
It really is. Another classic involves linking physical sensations to social judgments. The warm cup study.
Ah, right. Tell us about that one.
Participants were asked to briefly hold either a cup of hot coffee or a cup of iced coffee, supposedly just to help the experimenter carry something. Then later, they read a description of a fictional person and had to rate their personality traits.
And the coffee temperature mattered.
Hugely. The people who held the warm cup rated the fictional person as significantly warmer, more generous, more trusting, more good-natured than the people who held the cold cup.
Wow. So a completely irrelevant physical sensation bled over into a complex social judgment. My decision to trust someone could hinge on whether I just held a warm mug.
The evidence suggests, yeah, it could be influenced by factors like that. These subtle, unconscious inputs shape our feelings and judgments, which we then experience as our own reasoned conclusions.
If these tiny things affect us, this must blow up when we talk about consumer choices, right? Marketing must be all over this. We like to think we choose products based on rational preference, but
Psychology says mostly, no. We're far less rational and stable in our preferences than we believe. Often, we don't have fixed preferences that we consult. We actually construct our preferences on the fly, in the moment of decision, heavily influenced by context.
like how things are presented.
Exactly. Simple things, like the order options are presented in, stuff at the beginning or end of a list often gets chosen more. Or just the sheer number of choices, too many can paralyze us or make us choose something simpler, maybe not even optimal. These contextual factors often outweigh the actual qualities of the product itself.
And there are specific biases that marketers exploit, like the decoy effect. How does that one work? It sounds sneaky.
It is sneaky and incredibly effective. It shows how relative our value judgments are. Imagine you're offered 2 magazine subscriptions. Option A is online only for $100. Option B is print and online for $200. Maybe you lean towards A, the cheaper one.
Okay.
Now they introduce a third option, the decoy. Option C is print only for $199.
That seems pointless. Option B gives you print and online for just $1 more.
Exactly. Option C is objectively worse than B. Nobody should choose it, but its presence changes everything. Suddenly, option B, print and online for $200, looks like a fantastic deal compared to the almost as expensive print-only decoy.
Ah, so the bad option makes the expensive option look way better by comparison.
Precisely. And studies show that introducing that decoy dramatically shifts people's choices towards the more expensive option B. You feel like you're making a rational value comparison, but your preference was just manipulated by adding an irrelevant option.
The value wasn't inherent, it was created by the framing. We see something similar with the endowment effect too, right? Just owning something makes it more valuable to us.
Yeah, the endowment effect is fascinating. Give someone a simple object like a coffee mug, then ask them how much they'd sell it for. Ask another person who doesn't own the mug how much they'd pay for it.
The owner asks for more money.
Significantly more. The mere fact of ownership, the feeling of this is mine, instantly inflates its perceived value. Again, preference isn't based on objective utility. It's partially constructed by the state of ownership itself.
This is pretty unsettling. If our basic consumer preferences are this easily pushed around, what about things that really matter, like our moral judgments? Surely those are stable and based on deep principles.
You'd hope so, but the research suggests even our moral compass can be nudged by irrelevant factors. There was a study, for example, looking at the effect of cleanliness cues.
Cleanliness, like hand sanitizer.
Exactly. They found that people standing near a hand sanitizer dispenser judged certain moral transgressions, things like minor lies or questionable actions, more harshly than people who weren't near the sanitizer.
Seriously, why?
The theory is something like the feeling of physical cleanliness unconsciously reduces the psychological need for moral purity or leniency. It subtly shifts the moral judgment scale. It's another example of an external, non-rational factor influencing what feels like a deeply personal, reasoned moral stance.
Wow. Okay, so the brain might decide early, physics might be deterministic, and our environment is constantly nudging us unconsciously. And then our conscious mind comes in and claims ownership of the decision.
And not just claims ownership, but justifies it. This ties into another huge concept in psychology, cognitive dissonance.
Right, the discomfort when our beliefs and actions don't line up.
Exactly. When our behavior, perhaps driven by unconscious factors or external nudges, conflicts with our self-image as a rational, consistent person who makes good choices, we feel this mental tension dissonance.
And how do we resolve it? We usually don't admit we were irrational or inconsistent, do we?
Rarely. Instead, we tend to change our beliefs or attitudes to match the behavior we already performed. We rewrite the narrative. If I went through a really tough, maybe embarrassing initiation to join a group, I can't easily admit it was pointless.
So you convince yourself the group must be amazing.
Precisely. You elevate your opinion of the group to justify the effort you expended. I worked so hard for this, therefore it must be incredibly valuable. We rationalize post hoc to maintain the illusion that our actions flowed logically from our autonomous choices and stable beliefs.
Wait, but I have to push back here a little. What about situations where people make incredibly difficult conscious efforts to change? Like someone battling addiction. That feels like pure conscious struggle and willpower. It doesn't feel like just rationalizing something that happened automatically. Doesn't that kind of grit prove conscious agency does play a role, even if impulses are determined?
That's a fantastic question, and it's probably the most powerful intuitive argument for free will. The feeling of effortful striving is undeniable. The determined view doesn't necessarily deny the struggle or the change.
It just reinterprets it.
It might reinterpret the conscious experience of that struggle. Perhaps that feeling of effort, that conscious grappling, is the very mechanism by which the brain is actually rewiring itself. It's part of the determined process of change, not proof of something outside that process. The feeling of, I am choosing to fight this, might be the subjective experience of complex neural recalibration firing up.
So the struggle is real, but it's a determined struggle.
Potentially. It's the system working hard to change its own programming, triggered by inputs like suffering or new information. Which brings us neatly to the evolutionary question. Why would we even have this feeling?
Right. So if this powerful feeling of choosing is potentially an illusion generated by deterministic or random processes, why on earth would evolution favor it? Illusions usually only stick around if they give some kind of survival advantage. Why equip us with this potent but possibly false belief?
That's the multi-million-dollar evolutionary question, isn't it? And the consensus, looking across our sources, really points toward its crucial role in social function.
Social function? How so?
Think about it. The belief in free will, the idea that people choose their actions and are responsible for them, is the absolute bedrock of human society. It's what makes systems of praise, blame, reward, and punishment make sense.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
Without assuming people choose, you can't really hold anyone accountable. Society would break down.
It would be incredibly difficult to maintain cooperation in large, complex groups. If someone harms you, you need to believe they chose to do so to decide how to react. Are they a danger? Was it intentional? This attribution of choice and responsibility allows us to navigate social interactions, enforce norms, and build trust. It's like the operating system for social life.
So it's a necessary fiction for civilization.
Many theorists argue exactly that. But it's not just about society, it's also about the individual. The belief in agency seems to be a powerful motivational engine.
How does believing you're in control motivate you?
Well, think about the opposite. If you genuinely believed everything you do is predetermined, that your effort makes no real difference to the outcome, why would you bother trying hard?
Yeah, that sounds pretty demotivating. Leads to fatalism.
Exactly. But if you believe, even if it's an illusion, that your choices, your effort today, directly shape your future tomorrow, you're much more likely to persist through difficulties, plan for the long term, and generally strive harder. People with a stronger sense of personal control, what psychologists call an internal locus of control, tend to be more resilient, achieve more, and even be healthier.
So the illusion makes us try harder, which is adaptive.
It encourages striving, planning, and taking responsibility, all of which generally lead to better outcomes for the individual and the group. It's a huge survival advantage to have organisms that don't just give up.
Okay, that makes sense from a social and motivational angle. What about from a more nuts and bolts perspective, like how the brain works computationally?
Yeah, there's also the idea of the self-modeling requirement. From a computational viewpoint, for a complex system like the brain to effectively plan and predict outcomes in a constantly changing world, it needs to build an internal model of itself.
A model of itself as an agent.
As an agent capable of making choices and influencing the environment, the brain needs to run simulations. If I do this, what happens? If I do that, what's the likely outcome? This subjective feeling of choosing might simply be the conscious experience of running these internal simulations and comparing potential futures.
So the feeling of I could do A or B is just the brain modeling those possibilities to plan better.
It's the output of a sophisticated planning mechanism, not necessarily proof of metaphysical freedom. It's about effective computation in a complex world.
And this internal model, this feeling of being a chooser, also helps create a stable sense of self over time, like narrative continuity.
Absolutely vital. We need to feel like we're the same person from day to day, making decisions based on consistent values and learning from past experiences. The story we tell ourselves, I am the chooser, I made this decision for these reasons, helps create that stable, continuous self.
It lets us learn from our mistakes.
Exactly. If you make a bad decision, you attribute it to a poor choice you made. This allows you to update your internal model and potentially behave differently next time. This narrative glue is essential for learning, psychological stability, and navigating complex social relationships, even if the underlying decisions were, determined all along.
Okay, let's loop back to that challenge we ended the last part with. Real behavioral change. People do overcome addictions, learn new skills, change their lives drastically. If it's all determined, how is that kind of profound self-modification possible? It feels like the ultimate expression of agency.
It feels like it, yes. But the deterministic perspective doesn't deny that change happens, it just frames it differently. Think of the brain not as fixed, but as an incredibly adaptive, determined system capable of learning and rewiring itself.
So change is possible, but it's a determined change.
Right. Determined systems can absolutely learn and modify their own future behavior based on new inputs and experiences. Your brain is constantly rewiring itself. That's neuroplasticity. When someone overcomes an addiction, it's a profound change. But it could be seen as the deterministic result of new inputs, therapy, support groups, suffering, new insights, medication maybe.
So the conscious experience of choosing to change, the feeling of effort.
Might be the subjective correlate of those neural circuits firing up, the necessary part of the determined cascade that leads to change. The feeling of, I choose to change, could be the signal that engages the brain's self-modification machinery.
The feeling is a trigger within the system, not an external cause.
That's a plausible interpretation. We see this clearly in things like cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT.
How does CBT fit in?
CBT is explicitly about changing thought patterns and behavioral responses. You consciously practice identifying negative thoughts, challenging them, and substituting more adaptive ones. This is a systematic process of introducing new inputs into the cognitive system.
And it works. People's behavior changes.
It demonstrably works for many people. From a deterministic viewpoint, the therapy itself is a new causal input that predictably alters the downstream thoughts and behaviors. The person experiences this as gaining control and making better choices, but it's a determined outcome of the therapeutic intervention interacting with their existing neural setup.
And this relates to things like mindfulness or meditation, too. People often feel they gain more control over their impulses through these practices.
Exactly. Mindfulness in particular involves training attention to create a kind of observational distance between a stimulus, an urge, a thought, an emotion, and the habitual response.
You notice the urge to snap, but you don't immediately snap.
Right. You create a pause. Now, that pause doesn't necessarily contain some magical free will spark. But what it does do is allow time for other neural processes, maybe more reflective, goal-oriented parts of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex, to come online and influence the behavioral outcome.
So you're allowing different determined processes to compete, leading to a more flexible response.
Precisely. You're introducing more complexity and flexibility into the deterministic system by consciously deploying attention in a specific way, the practice of mindfulness. And that increased flexibility, that ability to respond differently than your automatic programming, feels incredibly empowering. It feels like choice and control. You're essentially using one determined process, mindful attention, to modulate another impulsive reaction.
Okay, let's get deeper into the brain machinery itself. We've said decisions aren't made in one spot, right? It's more like a distributed network, a committee making the call. Can we sort of map out the key players involved in creating this experience of choice? Who's doing what?
Yeah, we can definitely highlight some key brain regions, though it's always an oversimplification because they all work together. But if we were assigning roles, the prefrontal cortex, PFC, especially the front part, is often cast as the CEO or the executive suite.
What's its job?
It's involved in higher-level functions, setting goals, planning, weighing long-term consequences, inhibiting impulses, exercising cognitive control. It's trying to keep everything organized and focused on the bigger picture.
Okay, the rational planner. What about that feeling when you're really torn between two options, the agonizing feeling of difficulty?
That subjective sense of conflict and effort often points to the anterior cingulate cortex, ACC. Think of it as the conflict monitor or the effort sensor.
So it flags when a decision is hard.
Yeah, the ACC becomes more active when there are competing response options, when you make an error, or when a task requires significant mental effort.
Yeah.
It seems crucial for generating that feeling of, this is tough, I really have to decide here.
Got it. And then there's the part that creates the ongoing story of me, the sense of being a continuous self who makes these choices.
That narrative function is often linked to the default mode network, DMN. This is a network of brain regions that's most active when we're not focused on the outside world, when we're mind-wandering, reflecting, thinking about ourselves or others.
So it's like the brain's internal biographer or PR department, constantly writing the story of I.
That's a good way to think about it. The DMN seems crucial for generating that continuous sense of selfhood and weaving our actions into a coherent personal narrative, including the narrative of being an agent making choices.
And where does the final decision actually get sort of tallied up and sent out as an action command?
That's complex, but regions within the basal ganglia, particularly the striatum, are heavily implicated. You could think of the striatum as a kind of action selection hub, or maybe the voting booth.
How does it work?
It receives inputs from all over the cortex PFC, emotional centers, sensory areas representing different potential actions, and their associated values or rewards. The striatum seems to integrate these competing signals, weighing them up, and ultimately facilitating the selection and initiation of one specific motor output over others. It's where the winning option emerges from the neural competition.
So it's really a network effect, no single decider module.
Exactly. It's a dynamic interplay across these regions and others.
And the most striking evidence for consciousness just being the interpreter, making sense of things after the fact, comes from those split brain studies, right?
Oh, the split brain research by Sperry and Gazzaniga is absolutely fascinating and deeply relevant here. These were patients who had their corpus callosum, the huge bundle of nerves connecting the left and right brain hemispheres, surgically severed, usually to treat severe epilepsy.
So the two halves of their brain couldn't communicate directly anymore.
Correct. And this allowed researchers to present information to just one hemisphere. The left hemisphere typically handles language and speech, while the right is more involved in spatial tasks and processing certain emotions, but is largely nonverbal.
What happened when they gave an instruction to the nonverbal right hemisphere?
Okay, here's a classic example. They might flash an instruction like walk only to the patient's left visual field, which goes primarily to the right hemisphere.
So the language part of the brain, the left hemisphere, doesn't see the command walk.
Right, but the right hemisphere sees it and understands it nonverbally. So the patient gets up and starts walking.
Okay.
Then the experimenter asks the patient addressing the verbal left hemisphere, "Why did you get up?"
What does the left hemisphere say? Does it say, I don't know?
Almost never. Even though the left hemisphere has no actual clue why the body started walking because it didn't see the command, it instantly invents a plausible reason. The patient might say something totally confident like, "Oh, I felt thirsty, I was going to get a drink of water."
Wow. It doesn't hesitate. It just confabulates, makes up a story.
Immediately and seamlessly.
Yeah.
Gazzaniga called this the interpreter function of the left hemisphere. It seems to have this built-in drive to create a coherent narrative, to explain the body's actions and attribute them to conscious intentions, even when it has to completely make up the reason based on the available context.
So the brain is hardwired to tell itself stories about why it does things, stories that feel true but might be totally fabricated after the fact.
That seems to be a core function. It maintains that sense of unified agency, even when the actual causes are hidden or inaccessible to the narrating part of the mind.
And this internal storytelling machine isn't just happening in a vacuum. Society itself constantly reinforces this idea, doesn't it? It kind of locks the illusion in place.
Hugely. The social world is built upon the assumption of free will and actively shapes our belief in it. Our entire legal system, for instance, is predicated on it.
How so?
Concepts like criminal responsibility, mens rea, the guilty mind, negligence in civil law, the capacity to enter into contracts, they all fundamentally assume that people are rational agents who make conscious choices and can therefore be held accountable for the outcomes.
A court couldn't really function if the defense was always, my brain state made me do it.
It would grind to a halt. The law doesn't just reflect our belief in agency. It actively requires us to operate as if we are free and responsible agents. It shapes the very way we think about ourselves and others.
And our everyday language does the same thing, constantly reinforcing agency.
Absolutely. Just think about how we talk. I decided to. She chose to. They planned to. Our verbs are saturated with agency. We almost never say things like, my neural pathways computed the optimal response, which was.
No, that would sound very strange.
Right. So the very structure of our language constructs and reinforces the idea that we are the authors of our actions. Children learn this framework as they learn to speak, internalizing the idea of themselves as choosers.
And then there's the constant cultural reinforcement through social interactions.
Exactly. Every time we praise someone for their effort, criticize someone for being lazy or thoughtless, or congratulate someone on a wise decision, we are implicitly validating the idea of free will and personal responsibility.
It's like a constant feedback loop. Society expects us to be agents, so we act like agents, and society rewards or punishes us based on that assumption, reinforcing the belief.
Precisely. There's immense social pressure to maintain this belief, both in ourselves and others, simply to function within the cooperative and competitive dynamics of human culture. The illusion, if it is one, is deeply embedded in our social architecture.
Okay, we've built a pretty strong case for why the feeling of choice might be an illusion, rooted in neuroscience, physics, psychology, and reinforced socially. This leads us to the really thorny ethical questions. If it is an illusion, should we try to get rid of it? Should we tell everyone? This feels like a classic truth versus utility dilemma.
It absolutely is, and it's perhaps the most difficult part of this whole conversation. On one hand, there's the argument for intellectual honesty. If science suggests free will is an illusion, shouldn't we accept that truth, whatever the consequences?
The truth is valuable in itself.
Many philosophers would argue yes, but then you have the utility side. If this belief, even if false, is so fundamental to social order, motivation, and personal meaning, would abandoning it be disastrous? Is it a noble lie that we need?
That's a heavy question. What does the research say about the actual consequences? What happens when you do prime people to disbelieve in free will?
The empirical results are actually quite mixed and complex, which makes the ethical calculus even harder. Some studies do show negative effects.
Like what?
When researchers subtly expose people to arguments against free will or readings suggesting determinism is true, some studies find those people are subsequently more likely to cheat on tasks, act more aggressively, or be less helpful towards others.
Wow. So undermining the belief makes people behave worse. Why?
The interpretation is often that if people feel they aren't truly responsible for their actions, they might feel less bound by moral constraints. If it's all determined anyway, why bother being good? It can potentially lead to a feeling of reduced self-control or justification for selfish impulses.
Okay, that sounds like a really strong argument for maybe not shouting from the rooftops that free will is an illusion. Keep the useful fiction intact.
It's definitely a point for the utility side. However, other studies paint a different picture. Some research suggests that learning about the deterministic factors influencing behavior can actually increase compassion and reduce punitive attitudes.
How does that work?
If you genuinely believe that someone's bad behavior wasn't freely chosen, but was the result of factors like their upbringing, genetics, or situational pressures, you might be less likely to feel anger and desire for retribution.
You might be more inclined towards rehabilitation or understanding rather than just punishment.
Exactly. Learning about determinism can foster empathy and lead to less support for harsh, purely punitive justice systems. It can encourage a focus on fixing the causes of crime rather than just blaming the individual.
So it cuts both ways. Disbelief might increase cheating, but also increase compassion. It depends on the context or maybe the person.
It seems to. It depends on what framework replaces the belief in free will. If it's replaced by a sense of nothing matters, you might get negative outcomes. If it's replaced by a deeper understanding of causal factors and interconnectedness, you might get more positive social outcomes.
Which leads many thinkers to advocate for a kind of sophisticated middle ground, a pragmatic stance.
Yes, that seems to be where a lot of discussion lands. The idea is, okay, intellectually, we can grapple with the scientific evidence suggesting free will might be illusory. We can understand the arguments for determinism or the limits of agency, but in our daily lives, we continue to operate as if we have meaningful choice.
So accept the science in theory, but live the illusion in practice.
Kind of. It's about holding people responsible, including ourselves, praising effort, blaming harmful actions, making plans, striving for goals, essentially using the concept of free will as a vital social and personal tool without necessarily committing to its metaphysical reality. It's treating agency as functionally real because living that way works better for us and society.
That makes a certain practical sense, but this very pragmatism, this understanding of how malleable our sense of choice is now being actively used by technology, isn't it? Technology is getting really good at shaping our choices while making us feel totally in control.
Absolutely. This is the burgeoning field of choice manipulation technology, and it often relies explicitly on understanding the psychology of illusory control. Think about algorithmic recommendations.
Like on Netflix or Amazon.
Exactly. These systems create this feeling of infinite choice. Look at all these movies I could watch. But of course, the menu you see is heavily curated. The algorithm is subtly guiding you towards options it predicts you'll engage with, or options that benefit the platform.
It gives the satisfaction of choosing while actually constraining the options.
Precisely. It reduces the friction of searching, which feels good. But it does so by steering your behavior in predictable ways, often based on your past determined actions. You feel free, but you're navigating a carefully architected landscape.
And social media feeds are doing this constantly too, right? Optimizing for engagement.
Continuously. The algorithms controlling your newsfeed are designed to figure out what will keep you scrolling, clicking, and reacting. They influence countless micro-choices, what article to read, what post to like, what video to watch, all aimed at maximizing platform metrics, not necessarily your well-being or giving you a balanced view. Again, it feels like you're freely exploring, but your path is being subtly managed.
This sounds a lot like the concept of nudging, or what some call libertarian paternalism. Can you unpack that a bit? It sounds contradictory.
It does sound contradictory, but it's a very influential idea in behavioral economics and policy. Paternalism, because it aims to steer people towards choices that are deemed better for them, like saving for retirement or eating healthier. Libertarian, because it insists on preserving freedom of choice. Nobody is forced.
How do they do both?
By changing the choice architecture, the way options are presented to make the desired option easier or more appealing, often by leveraging our known biases. The key is that the nudge works because our choices aren't perfectly rational or stable. They're influenced by defaults, framing, and ease.
Give us a classic example of a nudge.
The canonical example is retirement savings enrollment. In systems where employees have to actively opt in to contribute to a 401k or similar plan, participation rates can be quite low. People procrastinate, it seems like effort.
Okay.
But if you change the default, so employees are automatically enrolled unless they actively take steps to opt out, participation rates shoot way up.
Even though they still have the exact same freedom to not participate.
Exactly the same freedom. But changing the default leverages inertia and the status quo bias. The nudge guides behavior towards the beneficial outcome, saving more without restricting choice. It works precisely because it manipulates the feeling of choice and our tendency to go with the flow. Placing healthy food at eye level in a cafeteria is another classic nudge.
It preserves the sense of freedom while biasing the decision. And looking ahead, these techniques are only going to get more powerful, right? Especially with things like brain-computer interfaces or advanced AI.
That's where the ethical questions become even more acute. Imagine brain-computer interfaces, BCIs, that can not only read intentions but potentially subtly reinforce certain neural pathways or even inject suggestions, Where does your thought end and the technological influence begin? The boundary could become incredibly blurry.
An AI that can predict our behavior with near-perfect accuracy.
If an AI understands your patterns, biases, and triggers so well that it can predict your next purchase or political opinion with, say, 99% accuracy, does that prediction itself start to constrain you? And how can that predictive power be used to influence you in ways you can't even detect? It raises profound questions about what authentic choice even means in a technologically saturated future. If you can be perfectly predicted, are you in any meaningful sense free? #outro. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we really come back to that fundamental conflict, don't we? On one side, you have the incredibly powerful, immediate, undeniable feeling of being in control, of making choices.
That core sense of agency.
Exactly. And on the other side, you have this mounting pile of evidence from inside the brain with neuroscience, from the basic laws of physics, from the subtle manipulations revealed by psychology, suggesting that this feeling might be a very sophisticated illusion.
An illusion that evolution likely favored because it serves crucial functions.
Right. An adaptive tool that helps us manage complex social lives, motivates us to strive and achieve, and gives us a coherent sense of self. It's the operating system that seems to allow creatures like us to function.
Which leaves us in a place of, well, maybe necessary uncertainty. It feels like we can't definitively prove free will exists in a metaphysical sense, but we also can't really live without acting as if it does.
That calls for a certain kind of humility, I think. Maybe the wisdom of uncertainty is the best approach. We can appreciate the power and complexity of the deterministic-looking processes that science reveals, while still finding immense practical, ethical, and personal value in concepts like choice, responsibility, and effort.
So holding multiple perspectives at once.
Perhaps. Embracing ideas like compatibilism, which defines freedom not as being uncaused, but as acting in line with our conscious desires and values, without coercion, even if those desires are themselves determined. Or finding value in grateful determinism, recognizing that maybe our talents, our successes, even our capacity for good aren't things we earned from scratch, but are perhaps fortunate outcomes of the interplay between our nature and nurture. Gifts to be grateful for rather than sources of ultimate pride.
So focusing on what feels within our control, our attention, our responses, our effort, even if the ultimate origin is murky.
Exactly. Focusing our energy on cultivating better responses, making wiser choices within the framework we experience, learning and growing these remain profoundly meaningful activities, regardless of the ultimate metaphysical answer.
And maybe, just maybe, the most amazing thing isn't whether we're free or determined. Maybe it's the fact that we can even ask the question.
That's a beautiful final thought. The capacity for self-reflection, for consciousness to turn upon itself and ponder its own nature, its own agency, that might be the real mystery. Whether that capacity is freely chosen or an emergent property of a determined system, the fact that the universe, through us, can marvel at the mystery of its own seeming freedom, that's pretty extraordinary.